to start, if you can just look around, see, have the feeling of where you are with these people, who we are, have a feeling of who we are, just to adjust to this environment. And also, if just a few of you wants to say something about why you are here, why are you interested in this workshop, just 2 or 3. It's useful for all of us to have some voice from you. Why are you here?
Because I know I am myself. It's very
So, for curiosity to do something with me.
It's very important to explore the developmental aspects of the supply space. It's very difficult that we are connected with
Did you hear her? No. She said for the developmental aspect, because she thinks it's important. Yes?
I'm here because I will be teaching Gestalt principles through a psychodynamic group in the near future, so I wanted to refresh the theory.
Okay, so we start with this brief introduction, and then we work at a clinical level. I prepared some references for you. There are 3 things. One is my book, this, where it's my model of phenomenological and aesthetic model, and procedural and field model. Then self as contact, and contact as self is a chapter of the book that Jean-Marie Robin edited about the self. So it's a chapter about the self in that big book that Jean-Marie edited. And then this is the 3rd thing is my chapter in this book, Gestalt Therapy with Children. In this book I try to combine developmental aspects with psychopathology. So what I'm offering today is something very new. It's the first time that I present this idea of including or integrating the background experience of development and the figure, the co-created figure of psychopathology. And what are we going to experience today? I am going to talk to you about a practical tool for staying present in the co-created contacting in a therapy session, while at the same time considering developmental and psychopathological concepts. So this is our aim today. And the basic concept is that the aim of Gestalt therapy and of Gestalt intervention is to grasp the spontaneity present in the therapeutic contact. So one of the challenges for us Gestalt therapists to speak about development is that we need to stay in the spontaneity of the present moment. So we need to find a way to speak of development while staying with the freshness of the present, not going to analytical concepts or analytical perspective. What helped me, other discoveries that helped me to find this integration, is Daniel Stern's theory. He spoke about the music that therapist and client, as well as caregiver and child, play together. So I worked with him for 9 years, and what I learned from him is the possibility to describe the dance that the client does with the therapist and vice versa, and that the mother does with the child. So to express what we see in terms of dance, to describe what we see in terms of dance, I think is very much aesthetic and phenomenological. So that's what I try to do also to describe mother and child interaction and therapist and client interaction. And then also the discovery of mirror neurons, the neuroscience. Vittorio Gallese is part of the group of Parma who discovered the mirror neurons that, as you know, are the evidence in our brain that we can feel as the other feels. We reproduce in our brain, in our experience, an intentional movement of the other. So when we see an intentional movement in the other, our brain tells us what the other feels. Even if we don't move, we know what the other feels. So this is the evidence of the embodied empathy and our capacity to be empathic with the other at a bodily level, and also our capacity to be empathic with the intentional movement of the other. So for instance, a child feels in his or her body the intention of the mother when the mother moves, even when she moves her face. So if the mother does an anxious face, in an anxious phase there is a lot of feeling, of bodily feeling, and the child gets that intentional movement. So the same thing we can trace also in the therapeutic meeting. We can feel the intentional movement of the client, and the client can feel our tension towards. So, how to consider the development of our client? One way is to consider developmental aspects like part of the ground experience in any given situation of a therapy session. The developmental aspects can be considered like the ground experience. It's something that the client has learned in previous contacts, and somehow we can see that here now. Let's stay with the first sentence for a moment. If a client sits in front of us and he does like this, what we sense is that the client has learned to, let's say, introject what we say, but at the same time we see that the client does this, and then there is a sort of distraction, looks some other direction. So we feel that this nodding is also combined with a distraction, maybe some projection, and then also the client does like this, And we sense that the client is retroflecting some energy. So all this, we sense all this. And we are talking of a melody that the person does or plays with us. When the person is with us, there is a melody in the ground experience. The melody is this. And we can feel that. You know? We can feel that there is a whole process in the person. The other thing is that we also resonate with this. So as therapists, we see the client who is doing this, and what do we feel? We might feel bothered, we might feel angry, and we might feel tender. So the idea is that what we feel belongs to the situation. What we feel is part of the field that the client is bringing to us. The client comes to us and he or she brings not only problems, his or her problems, not only the wishes, but also a field. And the more we are in contact with the client, the more we are at the contact boundary with the client, so sensitive to the client, the more we resonate to the client's field. Resonating is different from what's the other word? From the from the empathy, from the embodied empathy, no? Because resonating is to contribute with our own creativity, with our own individual feeling to what we see, to what we are part of. So as therapists, not only we are empathic, which means to feel as the client feels, but we are also resonating. So we contribute with our presence to the field of the client. Now this contribution has to do with the client's field or with the background experience of the client. So when the client does this and we feel angry, why do we feel angry? This is the spontaneous flow of the awareness of the therapist that we have learned to trust so much as Gestalt therapists. But this anger has to do with the other side of the moon of the client's feeling. So if he does this music with us and we feel bothered or angry, this belongs to a unit. I think it's a new way to see what Per say, the trust your senses. You know? But we cannot trust our senses just detaching from the client. Our senses belong to the client or are part of the situation. So are part of the experience of the client, of the ground experience of the client. And going to psychopathology, the sensed or aesthetic qualities of this experience of the ground are considered as shaping different sufferings of the between. So the suffering is always considered as a suffering of the between, a suffering that happens here at the contact boundary, but it's shaped by the ground experience. So for instance, if the client does this, and we know the music that is in this, and the therapist feels bothered or angry, what is happening at the contact boundary? What does the client do? What does the client do when he senses that we are bothered? He might do this more. Or he might become very wordy, very happy, very too much. He or she starts to talk a lot, to laugh, as if the client wants to cure the therapist, because he sees that the therapist is angry or bothered, and so the client starts to do something to take care of the therapist. So this is very interesting. All this is very interesting, and all happens without words. But the suffering that we look at is the suffering of the between. So that going to the laughing of the client, for us, means that the client is anxious at the contact boundary when he sees that the therapist is rigid, angry. And so what he does, he goes up, he goes out of the contact, and he tries to cure the therapist somehow. And this movement could be a narcissistic movement, because the client feels that the therapist is not grown enough, is not enough, so tries to cure the therapist. Or it could be an histrionic or hysteric movement, when the client feels anxiety and so tries to take the shape of a laughing person, to make another suit, to play another role. I have already said it. The past experiences organize contacting into polyphonic developmental domains. This is what I just summarized. And these domains are a given of the situation from which the ground experience is co-created. So the client sits like this. This is a given in phenomenological terms. It's something that belongs to the situation, and we have to work with that. And from that, the client makes his own experience with the therapist. Domains of contact can be experienced with greater or lesser anxiety, as I say. This is I try to use the words that are in PHG. I am a very faithful person, so I tried hard to make a sense of those words, introjecting, projecting, etc. Because, as you know, they are not phenomenological terms. They are, and they also say it. Goodman says that, writes that they are taken. These words are taken from the analytical theories. But they use these words in a phenomenological way. They try to make a passage from the analytical perspective to the phenomenological perspective. So they define this like childish reactions, which means in these reactions there is some vitality, some childish vitality. So these are positive terms, but they are individual terms. So who introjects, who projects? The child, not the mother. So they do not describe the dance between mother and child. They describe just what one does, introjecting, projecting. So I think we could use these terms to define what we learn, what the child learns. If the child is very active and the mother says, be quiet, and the child does that, we know that the child has learned to introject, to stay quiet. So these terms make domains of contact, competences, ways of contact that he or she has learned. And I made this grid to describe the domain being confluent, introjecting, projecting, retroflecting, and egotism, and the excitement, which is at the contact boundary, and the life-ability, which is connected, and the risk. So being confluent, what is the excitement in being confluent? Is being part of the environment. Being part of the environment is exciting. And then the life-ability is the embodied empathy. When we are confluent, we can be empathic at a bodily level. And the risk is confusion and madness. When we are confluent in a very anxious way, we can become confused and mad. So I did this with all these names. You don't have to, we don't have to go through all this, but you can have this. I think I can send it to you. You have it in the book. I don't want to stay on this because there are other things, but yes.
Madness, do you mean psychosis? Do you mean psychosis by madness? Or?
Yeah, it's a general word. Of course, psychosis is based on a confluential perception. Yes, there is no the perception of the boundary. Yes. Shall I go on?
Yeah.
And then in the chapter on the self of Jean-Marie's book, I considered sufferings of the ground experience. There are different experiences when we consider the neurotic suffering, the psychotic suffering, and the borderline suffering, and then I also considered the traumatized ground experience, which not today I think we have to consider trauma. It's too often, you know. Trauma is very frequent in our life, so we need to consider also the ground experience of trauma, which is different to me from the previous ones. In trauma, there is the ground experience is collapsed, a sense of ground. And the trauma is different when there is an abuse and when there is a loss. It's a different experience. In the case of abuse, there are mixed feelings and confusion about roles and moral aspects. Nothing is sure anymore. It's impossible to integrate the episodes and let another figure emerge. In the case of loss, the collapsed sense of ground is made of sudden and uncontrolled loss of ground security. And then I consider the excitement at the contact boundary. In this case, what is the excitement? And the emergent experience of the field and the diagnostic feeling in the field. That is what the therapist feels. So if you want to stay with this, with the trauma, in case of the abuse, the dissociation is what is felt at the contact boundary. The self continues to exist on another level. There is a split of the person, where the traumatic situation doesn't exist. And in the case of the loss, the self cannot integrate the new situation and continues to function trying to ignore the novelty. If we go to this neurotic, psychotic, and borderline, just to give you an example, no? In the neurotic experience of the ground is sufficiently clear about who feels what and provides a basic existential safety. This normal condition can be experienced on a continuum which ranges from less to a more anxious perception. And in case of what happens at the contact boundary is partly desensitized. And some spontaneity is lost. The other, or the environment, cannot be reached with a good balance between active and passive presence, with the middle mode. I understand this is too much for a workshop, so I just want to tell you something that you can go into deeper. Am I traumatizing you? Rich? Yes. So what I said until now is about the ground experience. The ground experience. The background experience. There are competences for contact, which is introjecting, projecting, etc. And there are also sufferings that come from the ground experience. So the experience is shaped in a different way. But if we want to look at what happens here and now, then we have to use other words. We have to try to describe the dance between the therapist and the client, the dance between the mother and the child. And so I call this the dance steps between two others. This quality of the ground experience is the basis for co-created figure of therapeutic contact. The observation focus switches from the client to the phenomenological field she is in and to the reciprocity. In other words, the reciprocal act of moving towards the other that characterizes our lives. So we look now not at how the client introjects, projects, etc., but what happens between the two. It's just another thing. And I think we need to do this because introjecting, projecting is too much individual. If we look at the field, if we look at the co-creation, we need to use other terms. And when we look at this interaction between client and therapist, or mother and child, caregiver and child, we have three perspectives, three glances, three glasses. First glass is the phenomenological criterion. We look at in terms of participation, participating into something, not objectification, not objectifying, but participating. It's the phenomenological criterion. So when we look at the child, we cannot say this child has this complex, the Oedipus complex. This is the opposite of what we do. But we can say what we feel in front of a child, our participation, if the child cannot speak. If the child speaks, then we ask, what do you feel? We ask the person to say. And then the aesthetic perspective is that we use our resonance, our aesthetic relational knowledge, as I call it, to support the intention of the client. So if the client that I was, the example before, no? The client is like this, what is our feeling? What is your feeling? If I'm a client and I do like this, what do you feel?
Excluded.
Excluded. That I am excluded.
No, I am.
You feel excluded.
Yeah.
Okay. And where do you feel is my energy as a client?
Self-enclosed.
Mm-hmm. But what would you do? As if you want to support my energy. I am close, but I come to you. I want to tell you something because I'm a client. I pay. So how do you, what would you support in my being with you?
You can mirror the client. You can mirror the client, offer support.
Yeah, that's what you would do. But what is your feeling?
Loneliness.
I'm tired.
Loneliness?
Stuck.
You are fighting. As a therapist?
Stuck.
Stop.
Stuck. As a therapist?
Frozen.
In between, some tenderness, some desire to help, such
Say louder.
the desire to help such close into client, some tenderness,
Tenderness?
yeah, to such a client.
Yes. Yes, if I were a painting, if I the client were painting, what would you feel?
Tied down. Tied down.
Time?
Tied.
You are an artist, right? Time?
Tied.
Tight? Tight.
Perhaps a different issue.
So my aesthetic vibrancy makes you feel tight. The tightness.
Tied.
Tied up, like
Tied up, yeah. Yes. So this is an aesthetic comment. The tightening or being tied up probably is part of the life of this client. Because the client is like a masterpiece. We say that, you know. And the feeling of the therapist is how the therapist resonates to the client, as if the client was a masterpiece. So there is a sense of tightness in the field. And this is the aesthetic criterion. And then the contextual or field method, in the PhD, they say, it's meaningless to define a breather without the air. So what we feel like the tightness is the other side of the moon of the client feeling. The unitary nature or organism environment field tells us that, for instance, the stomach cramp of a child become experience for a baby when the mother comes or doesn't come, and the anguish for a client becomes experience when the therapist moves or doesn't move in front of it. This client, which is like this, makes a therapeutic experience or an experience in the therapeutic setting when we move towards him or her, when we do something. That's the experience. And the child has an experience of hunger or crying or cramp when the mother comes or doesn't come. So the experience happens at the contact boundary. And this is the unitary nature of the experience of the client, of our sense of self. The unitary nature of organism environment. So whatever we do, we are important for the client. We shape the experience of the client. The experience of the situation influences the experience of the other, who is an important moderator of the sense of self. Linus Sterk said this. I think we can agree with this. And these are the dance steps that I thought in my last book about children. I defined what mother and child do, what caregivers and child do when they interact. I thought to 8 dance steps. The first is to intuit each other, resonate with each other. So it's the bodily empathy. Then to perceive each other, to see that the other exists with the senses, and to activate each other. Then to recognize each other and to recognize the intentional movement of the other. First, mother and child are activated by one by the other, so they wake up, and then they resonate to each other. Like the mother smiles when the child cries, or the mother is anxious when the child cries. And then to adjust the one to the other. If the mother touches the child and the child cries, the mother doesn't touch him or her anymore, or touches him in a different way. And so when we dance with someone else, we try not to step on the other's toes. And so we continuously adjust the one to the other, which doesn't mean to renounce to ourselves. It means to measure our movement outward, considering the other. And we do this with our clients. And then to take bold steps together. To do something which is out of the schema. I was giving an example this morning with a child, parents and child. The child, when he has to go to school, is very anxious and he vomits because he feels the tension in his stomach. And the parents are also very anxious and nervous, and all the tension goes up. And the therapist looks at this family, and this all of a sudden feels that a smile is needed. So suggests the smile to the parents. The parents smile, and all of a sudden all is relaxed. So the smile is to take a bold step together. Like there is tension, and the parents smile. It's not linear. It's a bold step. Something that they do out of the schema, out of the tension. And we do a lot of these things when we are with another person. And then to have fun together. This is also something that the mother and the child do. And also to reach, to have the sense that I have reached the other. Like the child has reached the mother, and it does like this, you know, the sense that we have reached the other. We do this also with an intimate person when finally we reach our goal. And then to let oneself go to the other, or take care of the other. So at that point there is an intimacy. I would stop here with the theory, because this grid is what I propose to use to people who look at caregivers-child interactions. It can be used also for research purpose. It can be used to look at therapist and client. And I would stop here. And when do we finish?
Like the session that I had a question, but I'm not sure if these kind of questions now or later.
Let's see if there is some feedback. Otherwise, we go with your question.
Yes, I would like to say Sala means thank you.
Do you want to come for the question? Or you?
No, I can ask from here. It was a great pleasure for me to follow the process, but then I got lost because I didn't understand how do you come to mother.
Oh, you?
How did you come to mother? And it was the main for me. Maybe you could explain a bit more about that sheet thinking. And everything after the mother also was more or less clear for me, but the sheet wasn't.
I answer. It's part of what I was calling the polyphonic development of the mind. So we feel many things as therapists. I had the feeling that first I told her, "Are you a first child?" Yeah. This was also something that I felt like a person who is a good person and takes care of things. This is a sort of hobby that I have to guess the birth order. People who have worked with me know that. When I was 23, I wrote a book about theory of personality, how we develop, the developmental aspects that come from the size of the family, from being the first in the birth order. So it's something that I like very much to guess, because I can see how a first child shapes his or her life, and the second child, the third child. So sometimes I put a question to the client to check what I can feel that. And we grow up differently if we are first, second, or third child. The field is different. And then when I asked about the mother was because I felt that in her being a good girl, in her being a good person, there was some confusion also. There was some, in her eyes, there was some stopping. So if I put into her shoes, I imagine that she was confused about who does, or who takes care of whom.
What did this have to do with the social part? Because I was wondering how you came to the mother as something significant in terms of her feeling about the sociopath. Was that about taking care? Was that about taking care? The fact that she couldn't believe that this person could change? I'm sorry, I don't know if you understand what I'm saying, because I'm not being clear.
Sorry.
I'm just wondering about the mother and that being a good person and taking care of everything.
No. From her.
Yes. So I'm just wondering what this mother thing had to do with her problem with the sociopath, her belief of the sociopath. It had nothing to do with
Not so much, but it has to do with her way of perceiving situations.
Yes.
Perceiving herself as a
Wanting
good person.
Yes.
She was confused whether am I a good person or not.
Yes, I don't.
Do you want to do an exercise?
Yes.
Try on yourself. Try yourself to guess. Not only. If you go into couples, breathe, feel your body, get in touch with your senses, and see the other. Then you talk. Tell to the other whatever you want to say, whatever. You can put questions also to the other, but then don't ask the birth order directly. You have to guess it. And see if you can guess the birth order of the other from what you feel, from the feeling of the field. No? If you imagine that the first child somehow takes care of things and of the wellness of the parents, and the second child is more more on the outside, more marginal. And the third is more the person who looks at the family from the outside, like a family therapist. He knows very well the group movements. But anyway, you try to guess from your feeling the birth order of the other. Do you want to do that? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What about a single child?
What about?
Single child? It's not the first, but the single child?
So now, being into couple, trying to guess that 5 minutes. 5 minutes the exercise. Let's go back. Let's go back. Let's go back. How was your exercise? How was? Did you feel? Did you understand? Did you guess? Just a few experiences. Who wants to say? Yes?
I make wrong choice. I think that this lady, she was older, but she was the third in the family. And I all the time observe about her and think that she's fairly a lot and she's deeply and profoundly pay attention to everything. But in the end, we discovered that she's now take the place of the older in your family. And also the small misunderstanding was from the bedside, may I say? Yeah. And then she said that she thinks that I'm the second child, but I'm the older, the first one. And that's because I have some side like, oh, what do you say? Something like looking for some older sibling.
So he told you that you are the youngest?
No, she told that I'm the younger, but I'm the oldest. I'm the first son.
Because she saw these plans.
Yeah, but I have such, how to say, strategy to be close to the people. What can you say for me?
Yes, I like that. It's your strategy not to remain trapped into the first child role. Yeah, as you see, what we see is real. The interpretation can be wrong, but what we see is real. So if she saw, she or he, I don't, if she saw this in you, it's real. And you say that it's an important part of you. It's your way to escape from fixed role. So I think you can trust your ability to see. The only thing we don't have to do is to interpret, to say, oh, you are the last child. We don't know. We know that there is something that it's here and belongs to a field. So the capacity to look from the outside, to look outside, is something that belongs to him. It might be something that belongs to being the last child, but not necessarily.
Sorry, that's actually the thing that I'm struggling the most. Because when you say that, I'm thinking about something you said before about participation versus objectifying. So to me, it sounds like when you're making those assumptions about what you feel, you are objectifying the client. So if I'm feeling something about the client, about his aesthetic resonance, I think they call it beautiful, but it's mine, it belongs to me.
Yes.
So it's my lens that I'm using to see the client. So if I construct something based on that lens and believe that it belongs to the client, I'm objectifying it. I'm already changing the relationship in the way I think is the correct one.
I agree with you, because what you resonate, it's your resonating. It belongs to the situation, though. Not to the client, but to the situation.
How do I know there is a situation and not me that is thinking that?
Well, that's a definition. The situation is the situation. It's the given. This is the phenomenological stance. We are in a situation now. How do we participate in this situation?
But I'm bringing my phenomenology and I'm meeting your phenomenology. So
I don't think there is my phenomenology, your phenomenology.
all right, so that's what we do.
I think we participate in a situation, and my resonating with you has to do with me and with you. It has to do with the situation, what we co-create. So your reaction to my action or whatever has to do also with me, not only with you. Because with another person, you would be different. So we co-create something.
I totally believe in the co-creation bit, but if I'm using my senses to guess yours, that's when I'm thinking I'm objectifying you or I'm pushing you in a direction that might belong to me.
The sense is that I'm not saying that what I feel is of the client, so I'm not objectifying. I'm saying that what I feel belongs to the situation we are experiencing together. And since the client is there to be treated, to be cured, or is there to be himself, we are participating in what is experiencing and asking for.
I agree with that. I don't agree with I guess what I see is like pushing a bit of my own perceptions. I'm understanding you don't want to do that too, but that's how I saw it.
Yeah.
I'd like to join you and just share my resistance for guessing. And I felt it would be wrong. I didn't like me knowing something about you. I enjoyed feeling and sharing and noticing and dialoguing about what I noticed, but I didn't like knowing something that I was not knowing.
Yes,
I felt
you didn't like to guess.
it would be like undressing my partner in a way. I was embarrassed to do that.
Well, the proposal was a joke, was to play. It was a play. It was to play together. It was not to be taken seriously. It was just use your senses to go inside the other. And I understand that you felt too much. You didn't want to enter so much, which is okay. Others?
I understand this pretext for dialogue, existential dialogue. Yes?
it is pretext. The guess is pretext for speak for existential dialogue. And when I look at, in the situation, like it is a way for dialogue existential. It is for good way. Not only for guess what you are triggering, second, third, and fourth.
Yes, of course. It's a way to, yes, a pretest to dialogue, of course. Yeah, I was not pushing you to do this in the session. This was not. It was a play. It was just play with your sensitivity. And I think that here you can do that, but of course with the clients.
May I ask you a question about the session you made before the exercise? Let me say after that the client's question was about confusing and feeling hurt between other people. It's as for me, it's like work with personality function. Who am I and who am I near the people who saw the thing. But during your session, you turn the client to the audience and work not with the figure of your personality, but with the drama. What can you see? And what do you want to say? And I lost a little bit why you pay so big attention to background. That was the aim of this your actions. Could you share?
Why did I ask her to look around? Because I want her to feel. I felt a bit that she was quick. So like I finished, I go, and I wanted her to be to take her space more, and to say how she to check and feel how she feels in front of me. So to take more her time and space, and in this sense it was a support to the personality function. Like I'm here, who am here, but also a support to the it function. So stay here, and you have the right to stay here and what you want to say. Okay, just anyone, any other thing that you want to say? Or you look tired, yes. Yes. You want to say something?
Share my experience. We don't know each other. So when you proposed the exercise, I thought, well, I don't feel like doing it. So I keep myself here on the basket, expecting that everybody find a couple. And he was there, by himself, I said no. And I called him. So he sit with me and we start talking. Actually, he teach me something about myself that I didn't know. We were doing questions, making questions about something about my smile, the way I called him. From the first minute, I felt it, that he was the youngest. But I said, no, you are not Margherita, you are not having an idea about what's going on, but keep on talking. And at the end, I asked him, are you the youngest? He said, yes. I said, oh, okay. And then he told me, you're a single child. And then I thought, no, I'm the oldest. But you're right, I'm a single child. He said, why? Because I was raised by my mother, not by my mother, but by my grandmother and my aunt. So then I reconnect with my sister and I said, my whole life I've been a mix of, I was the oldest, but I was single. Truly, I was single for many years. So I thank you, Andrew, for that. And thank you for proposing the exercise that I didn't feel like doing it, but ended up very productive.
Thank you. Okay, so I hope that my message reached you, which is to go from, to take care of the therapist. Okay, This is something that supports the feeling of the therapist, but not in a, let's say, Persian way. I am right. If I am angry, I have the right to tell you I'm angry. This was a way to support too much the individuality of the therapist. I hope that that you get the message that to support the therapist means to support the contribution that the therapist gives to the field, with the unitary nature of the contact between client and therapist. And so we cannot go we don't have the truth. What we feel is part of a situation, and we need to contextualize what we feel. So I hope that I gave you this, this message has this message, and thank you for your comment, because this helped me to underline this. So have a good evening, enjoy. There are brochures here.